The flight attendant smiled politely, but firmly, as she gestured toward the middle row. Her voice dipped in that overly rehearsed tone airline staff use when they expect compliance without question. "This one here is available, ma'am," she said, pointing toward an economy plus seat near the middle of the aircraft. Danielle Ellis blinked once, calmly, and then looked down at her boarding pass again, already knowing what it said. "No, I'm in 3A, she replied evenly, holding it up like evidence in a trial. "First class, window seat, reserved, paid in full." This wasn't a last-minute upgrade or a loyalty point gamble. This was hers, booked weeks ago by her executive assistant, like every other trip she'd taken this quarter. Danielle didn't fly casually. As the CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics firm, she traveled for deals, mergers, and executive summits, and always in the front cabin. When she turned back to her assigned seat, she saw the problem clearly. A white man, mid-50s, slightly overweight, legs crossed like he'd just claimed a throne. He wore tan slacks, a loose button-down shirt, and noise-canceling headphones. His posture said it all. This was not a mistake. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was exactly where he intended to be, and it didn't seem like he was going to move. Danielle paused. She wasn't new to this. She had encountered rude travelers, entitled passengers, and even suspicious glances when boarding first class, but rarely something this blatant. She stepped forward, keeping her expression neutral, and tapped the man gently on the shoulder. He flinched slightly, then looked up at her with the disinterested air of someone being asked for directions in a parking lot. "Excuse me," she said clearly. "I believe you're in my seat." The man didn't even remove his headphones fully. He slid one side off his ear, glanced lazily at her, and muttered, "Yeah, I'm not moving." "Take the one over there." He gave a small jerk of his head toward the middle row. Economy plus, not even business class. And then, just like that, he put his headphones back on and went back to scrolling through his tablet. Legs stretched out comfortably like he'd just done her a favor. Danielle didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult anyone, demand attention, or launch into a scene, because she didn't need to. She simply turned around, walked past the aisle, and made her way toward the galley, where two flight attendants were casually chatting near the beverage cart. Her heels clicked quietly on the floor. She waited a moment until one of them turned. "Excuse me," she said with a calm smile. "Can I please speak to the lead attendant?" The two women looked at each other for a beat, then one nodded and disappeared toward the front. Danielle stood silently, arms at her sides, boarding pass still in hand. A few passengers peeked curiously down the aisle, sensing something was off. Within 2 minutes, the lead attendant appeared. A tall woman with a slick ponytail and the overly smoothed expression of someone trying to neutralize conflict before it happens. Danielle repeated her situation clearly. She had a ticket for 3A, which was occupied by a man who refused to move. She had shown him the boarding pass. He had acknowledged it and still told her to sit elsewhere. The attendant nodded slowly, looked toward the front, then sighed. "Sometimes seats get double booked," she said, as if this explained everything. "There's an empty seat further back, ma'am. Would you mind just taking that one for now? We're trying to get out on time." Danielle blinked. "So, your solution is that I take a downgrade because he refuses to move?" The attendant's tone grew slightly tense. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to argue. It's just easier this way." Danielle's eyes narrowed slightly. Not angry, focused. "Easier for who?" she asked. The attendant didn't answer. The man in 3I was still in place, still unaware or pretending to be, scrolling through his iPad like this was his private jet. Danielle scanned the cabin. Passengers were listening now, some pretending not to, others clearly eavesdropping. One woman in 2C had her phone slightly tilted, already recording. That was fine. Danielle wasn't planning to make noise. She simply nodded, thanked the attendant with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes, and turned back toward the exit. She walked calmly off the plane. No drama, no shouting. Just a phone call the moment her heels touched the terminal floor. "Ground ops," she said into her Bluetooth. "Danielle Ellis. Yes. Flight 486. Gate B22. Please don't let it leave the gate yet. I'm flagging a compliance issue. Thank you, that's all." Then she sat by the window in the lounge and crossed her legs, sipping green tea like she had nowhere urgent to be, while the plane remained grounded. Inside, things began to shift. The delay timer ticked up. 10 minutes, 20, 30. The flight crew kept repeating vague announcements about mechanical delays and brief holds, but the nervous energy was building. Passengers whispered, the man in 3A fidgeted, and the flight attendants? They made several walks up and down the aisle, their confidence visibly cracking. Then 2 uniformed staff from airport security boarded the plane. They approached 3A and asked to see the man's ticket. He fumbled, nervous, then showed them his phone. Row 14, B, economy. Silence fell. A few passengers gasped. The crew didn't argue. They simply asked him to stand. When he resisted, a second warning came. Sir, please comply or you will be removed. He finally stood, red-faced and indignant, and was escorted off. 5 minutes later, Danielle re-entered the plane. Same calm steps, same quiet presence. The flight attendants apologized. The captain greeted her personally, and as she took her rightful place in seat 3A, a low wave of claps and nods passed through the cabin. No gloating, no, I told you so. She opened her laptop, adjusted her blazer, and began reviewing a merger proposal like the disruption had never happened. Because for Danielle Ellis, CEO, strategist, leader, reclaiming her space didn't require volume, just precision. 10 full minutes passed before the lead flight attendant returned, walking with that tight-lipped professionalism that comes just before inconvenience turns into incident. She gave Danielle a measured look, not hostile, not friendly, just weary, like she already decided how this would go before hearing another word. Ma'am, she said quietly, we've checked with the system. There may have been an error with your boarding pass. The man in that seat insists he was assigned 3A. Danielle said nothing. She simply held up her digital confirmation. Again, first class, 3A, confirmed by app, by email, and by payment history. The gate agents confirmed it was properly booked, she said. There's no error. He just refused to move. The attendant nodded slowly, lips pressed together, her voice hushed but defensive. Sometimes passengers swap seats. It happens. And we do have a few available in Economy Plus. Would you mind just... Danielle stopped her with a single raised eyebrow. Would I mind accepting a downgrade because someone took my assigned seat and you're unwilling to correct it? Her tone was still calm, but it had the unmistakable firmness of someone who leads meetings with global investors. The attendant's smile flickered. I understand, but we really need to get this flight out. If we can avoid delays... Her voice trailed off, hoping the implication would land. You're holding things up. But that wasn't going to work on Danielle. Not today. Not with a high-stakes merger waiting across the country. Not with her own team watching. She glanced at her watch, not because she was impatient, but because she was calculating. So your official policy, she asked slowly, is to reward whoever sits down first, regardless of assignment? The attendant's jaw clenched. No, ma'am, that's not what I'm saying. Then tell him to move, Danielle replied. You've seen the proof. You have the authority. You're just choosing not to use it. By now the murmurs were louder. A few passengers shifted in their seats to watch. The woman in 2C, still recording, her phone now angled more directly. Another man nearby began discreetly typing on his laptop. Live tweeting. Danielle noticed it all but didn't flinch. The man in 3A, meanwhile, hadn't said a word. He stared straight ahead, pretending not to hear, not to notice the attention. He sipped his drink and scrolled like he was doing something important. Like this wasn't about to blow up in his face. He had the look of someone used to taking space, used to not being questioned, and completely unprepared to be held accountable. Danielle didn't speak to him again. She had done her part. She had followed procedure. And now the system was showing her exactly who it protected and who it expected to quietly comply. But Danielle Ellis didn't build a global company by sitting down when told. She wasn't disruptive, but she was strategic. She didn't yell. She leveraged. I understand, she said finally to the attendant. You're under pressure, so I'll make this easy. She turned and walked calmly toward the exit. The attendant called after her. "Ma'am, we're about to close the doors." But Danielle didn't break stride. She stepped out of the cabin, back into the jet bridge, and within seconds had pulled out her phone. "Ground operations, this is Danielle Ellis," she said into her Bluetooth earpiece. "Flight 486, Gate B22. I've just deboarded due to a passenger misconduct issue and seat dispute. Please do not authorize pushback or door closure until it's resolved. Client compliance code applies." There was a pause. A voice on the other end confirmed. "Understood, Ms. Ellis. Aircraft hold activated." Back in the terminal, Danielle didn't pace or call anyone else. She simply walked to the nearest lounge chair, sat down and crossed her legs like a queen regaining her throne. She didn't need to rush. She already knew the flight wasn't going anywhere without her. Inside the aircraft, confusion spread like wildfire. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The engines never started. The doors never closed. Flight attendants made vague announcements about ground support checks and brief delays, but the tension was undeniable. Whispers swirled. Some passengers speculated a mechanical issue. Others guessed it was a medical hold. But those who had been paying attention, those who really saw what had happened, were starting to connect the dots. The man in 3A, he was beginning to look less smug and more agitated. His iPad was now locked, his hands gripping the armrests. He knew something had shifted. The pilot came out of the cockpit twice, once to speak to the head attendant, the second time to make a phone call on his personal device. Within another 5 minutes, 2 uniformed airport staff entered the plane. They walked straight to 3A. "Sir," one of them said calmly, "we need to verify your seat assignment." The man hesitated. "It's right here," he mumbled, fumbling through his phone. But when he finally produced it, the truth lit up the screen. 14B economy, not even close to first class. The staff didn't raise their voices, they didn't scold. They simply said, "You'll need to come with us." The man turned red. "She left the plane. Why does it matter? I'm already here." One of the agents replied coolly, "The passenger with rightful claim to 3A is returning. This seat is not yours." When he refused, security was called. And while it didn't end in handcuffs, it ended in embarrassment, the kind that lives forever online. He was escorted off the plane to a scattered mix of gasps, chuckles, and cameras. The woman in 2C was still filming. Danielle re-entered the cabin the way a judge enters a courtroom, not with arrogance, but with quiet authority that shifts the entire room. The murmurs softened instantly. The flight attendant stood straighter. The gate manager who escorted her didn't say much, only nodded respectfully as she guided Danielle to her rightful seat. 3A. The same man who had arrogantly refused to move 45 minutes earlier was long gone, removed by security, exposed by his own entitlement and the digital receipts that told the truth. Danielle didn't scan the cabin or look for applause. She didn't glance at the cameras, though several were still pointed at her. She didn't need the validation. She had something far better: vindication. She placed her carry-on in the overhead bin, adjusted her tailored navy blazer, and sat down with the grace of someone used to owning her space. Then she pulled out her sleek silver laptop, logged into a secured portal, and began reviewing the final documents for the merger her company was finalizing that week. While the rest of the plane buzzed with whispers and glances, she typed with surgical focus, like none of it had happened. Because for Danielle Ellis, this wasn't the drama. This wasn't the story. This was just Tuesday. The woman in 2C, still holding her phone, turned off the recording, but not before capturing one last shot. Danielle sitting in 3A, unbothered, unshaken, with her screen lit up by financials and power moves, while the entire cabin looked on. That clip would go viral within hours. Not because Danielle yelled, not because she threatened lawsuits or called the media, but because she didn't have to. Her calm was louder than outrage, her precision sharper than protest. That night, the video, titled "Black Woman CEO Kicked Out of Her First-Class Seat, But Watch What Happens Next," hit over 7 million views in under 24 hours. Thousands of comments flooded in. "This is how you dismantle arrogance with grace." She didn't demand justice. She scheduled it. Some people fight with noise. Others fight with access. But Danielle didn't repost it. She didn't comment. She didn't even acknowledge it publicly. She flew to her meeting, closed the deal, and flew back 3 days later on a private jet booked by her client. When asked by a reporter if she had any response to the viral moment, she simply said, "Some people take seats. Some of us build airlines." That quote, 6 words, became a rallying cry across social media. Back at the airline, corporate scrambled. The incident had sparked not only backlash, but questions from investors and journalists alike. Why was a black woman's CEO asked to relocate from her paid seat while an unassigned passenger was allowed to stay undisturbed for nearly an hour? Why did staff treat politeness as permission to be ignored? Internal memos were leaked. The gate agent was quietly reassigned. The lead flight attendant underwent additional training, and the airline issued a public statement. "We are reviewing our boarding policies and retraining staff to ensure equitable and respectful treatment for all passengers." But the real damage wasn't legal. It was reputational. Danielle's silence spoke volumes. She didn't cancel them. She didn't need to. Because what had really gone viral wasn't just a seat dispute. It was the image of a poised black woman CEO sitting in first class like she never left. That image, captured mid-flight, face calm, laptop open, appeared in think pieces, in DEI webinars, in leadership talks. It was a moment that reminded people what power really looks like. Not always loud, not always aggressive, but undeniable when it walks down the aisle and takes back what's already its own. By the time the plane landed, Danielle Ellis had already received 3 congratulatory texts from board members, 1 from her assistant, and a calendar confirmation for a CNBC interview request. Even though she hadn't spoken a single word about the incident publicly, the news moved faster than the plane. Before the wheels even touched down, clips of the flight had been posted, clipped, subtitled, and re-uploaded across Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. Influencers were reacting to it. DEI advocates were dissecting it. Airline analysts were calling it a preventable PR disaster. But beyond the outrage and the headlines, something deeper was happening. People, especially black professionals, began sharing their own stories. The subtle seat switches, the escalated tone when they politely asked for help, the sideways glances in executive lounges. Danielle's story had become more than a viral moment. It had become a mirror, reflecting an uncomfortable truth that many knew too well. When you look like Danielle, even your paid seat sometimes comes with a silent question. Are you sure you belong here? But Danielle had answered it the only way she knew how, by sitting down and refusing to shrink. That afternoon, the airline's PR team scrambled. Within 12 hours, they released a carefully worded apology, citing unfortunate miscommunication, promising to evaluate boarding protocols, and pledging to provide bias awareness training to cabin staff. But the internet wasn't satisfied, because the issue wasn't policy, it was pattern, and people had seen enough. The man who had taken Danielle's seat was identified within hours by internet sleuths. His LinkedIn was flooded with comments before he locked it. His employer issued a brief statement disavowing his actions, and he quietly disappeared from public view. But Danielle, she didn't retweet, didn't name names, and didn't gloat. She let the facts and the footage do the work. That power shook people. She wasn't a symbol, she was a standard. Across LinkedIn, black executives and entrepreneurs reshared the video with their own captions. "This is how you lead. Poise is power," and "No mic needed, just presence." Meanwhile, corporate leaders were forwarding the clip in private Slack channels. DEI teams used it to spark workshops. One Ivy League professor even included it in a leadership case study titled "The Weight of Stillness, Power Without Volume." Danielle's own company, a logistics firm she built from the ground up, gained over 40,000 new followers that week. Her assistant fielded over 120 media requests. But still, Danielle remained silent, at least publicly. Privately, she was working, closing a deal, onboarding a new CFO, signing off on a new fleet acquisition. Business for her didn't pause for drama. It thrived on discipline. On day 3, however, she posted a single sentence on her company's social media account. No hashtags, no link in bio, no photo. Just words. First class isn't just a seat, It's how you carry yourself when the world tells you to move. That post alone was shared over 90,000 times. Some called it poetry. Others called it a masterclass in silent leadership. Danielle called it Monday. Because she didn't step onto that plane to prove anything. She stepped on because she paid for her seat, because her name was on the manifest, and because she earned the right to fly forward, just like anyone else. And when that right was quietly denied, she didn't raise her voice. She raised standards. In the wake of the incident, the digital realm exploded into a frenzy of support, outrage, and deep reflection. Within hours of the viral clip surfacing, social media platforms were inundated with hashtags like Suranide, First Class Rights, Churn, Lead with Grace, and Churn, Own Your Seat, while thousands of users from diverse backgrounds shared their own accounts of similar indignities in public spaces. News outlets, influential bloggers, and thought leaders quickly began dissecting the episode, framing it as a stark representation of the systemic challenges that persist even in seemingly mundane moments, such as airline travel. Videos capturing Danielle's calm yet unyielding demeanor were remixed with commentary from civil rights activists, corporate leaders, and everyday people who resonated with her quiet display of strength. The clip, which had started as a simple record of a seating dispute, had become a cultural flashpoint, a symbol of how dignity and professional excellence can prevail against unchallenged entitlement. In countless tweets, Facebook posts, and Instagram stories, ordinary citizens recounted instances of subtle bias and everyday microaggressions. These conversations, interspersed with snippets of Danielle's poised face, collectively painted a larger narrative about respect, representation, and accountability. In one viral tweet, a prominent influencer wrote, "When you pay your dues, your seat is your right. Thank you, Danielle, for reminding us that even in a world built on fast service and faster judgments, integrity and respect still matter." These collective voices, amplified by algorithm-driven networks, catalyzed a ripple effect, spurring debates about the need for reforms in customer service protocols across various industries, not just airlines, and demanding that companies take a proactive stance in ensuring an environment where every individual, regardless of background or status, is accorded the respect they deserve. Meanwhile, interior images from the flight, capturing passengers' looks of surprise, discomfort, and admiration, trended across platforms, serving as visual evidence of the moment's significance and cementing Danielle's position as an inadvertent icon of modern leadership. Simultaneously, the airline found itself navigating a public relations maelstrom unlike any it had encountered before. Corporate executives, who had long prided themselves on stellar service and seamless travel experiences, were suddenly forced into damage control mode as the incident spread like wildfire across both traditional and digital media. Internal reviews were hastily initiated, and statements were issued that, while cautious and measured, did little to quell the mounting public outrage. Employees were summoned for retraining sessions that focused on sensitivity, equity, and proactive conflict resolution, while the passenger in question was quietly removed from all future flights, a move that, though it restored some semblance of order in the airline's internal process, did little to repair the broader reputational damage. For many, the airline's lukewarm response became emblematic of a larger corporate inertia. Critics argued that superficial apologies and procedural tweaks were no substitute for a deep-rooted commitment to fairness and accountability. The incident ignited conversations at boardrooms and barbershops alike, with experts and commentators questioning why policies that allowed such an egregious error to occur in the first place remained unchallenged for so long. In a series of industry panels streamed online, airline safety and customer service experts began calling for comprehensive audits of boarding and seating protocols, emphasizing the need for technological upgrades that could preemptively flag such discrepancies before they turned into public spectacles. One commentator noted, "This isn't just about a seat, it's about the subtle institutional biases that let entitlement override customer rights and ultimately how the smallest of oversights can ripple out to affect an entire community's trust." Even as the airline promised reforms, the critical narrative remained. When powerful figures like Danielle Ellis have to fight for what's rightfully theirs, it is a clarion call for systemic change that echoes far beyond the confines of a first-class cabin. As the dust began to settle, The impact of Danielle's quiet revolution resonated far beyond the immediate context of a misplaced seat. Corporate boardrooms, community centers, and diversity and inclusion seminars found themselves revisiting the event as a case study in dignified defiance and strategic non-confrontation. Danielle's measured response, the emblem of resilience without resorting to theatrics, became a touchstone for discussions on leadership under pressure and the art of reclaiming one's rightful space with minimal disruption yet maximal impact. Business magazines and leadership blogs dissected her every move, highlighting how she transformed an inconvenient mishap into a powerful statement about personal and professional integrity. University professors incorporated the incident into their curricula, using it as a framework to discuss modern leadership paradigms in an era where social media could turn every minor incident into a global moment. Meanwhile, everyday professionals, inspired by Danielle's example, began to document their workplace experiences, creating a digital ledger of both triumphs and tribulations that underscored the ongoing struggle for equality in spaces often taken for granted. For many, this event wasn't merely about reclaiming a seat. It was about asserting individuality and demanding respect in environments that, for too long, had silently dismissed the voices of those who dared to challenge the status quo. Public sentiment coalesced around a simple yet profound message. When we uphold standards of fairness and integrity, every minor victory contributes to a larger, transformative narrative. The dialogue sparked by this incident fostered a renewed commitment to accountability across multiple sectors, prompting companies to reassess not only their policies, but also the cultures that allowed such oversights to persist. In the end, Danielle's unspoken determination had done more than win a seat. It had elevated an entire conversation about dignity, equity, and the courage to silently, yet powerfully, demand that every individual be seen, heard, and respected. If that story made you feel something, whether anger, pride, or a reminder to always hold your ground, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. And for more real-life power moves, corporate clapbacks, and silent wins that change everything, hit that subscribe button. Because some flights don't just take off, they make history.